Works. My name is Valerij Ledenev. I work at Garage Museum of Contemporary Art Research Department, and I represent the archive, a Garage Museum that covers the history of contemporary Russian art since late 50s to nowadays. And my presentation concerns primarily the materials from the archives, from our archival collection. And well, first, we're speaking about the future of the institutions, art museums. And as many theorists, including Claire Bishop and Carmen Mersch, also Boris Groys in some parts, just to mention a few names, argue that museums today stop being just places for collecting art, conservation and display artworks. They move in the direction of the engagement. The engagement understood as not only socially as building the accessible environment, as working with the communities and different social groups, but also understood art historically, more philosophically. They become sort of arenas on which different social groups, communities, but also historical narratives and theories struggle to be represented under years of being overshadowed or not shown to the surface or being infringed in their own rights. Edith Rogoff and Carmen Mersch, they theorize the educational turn in the field of the museums. Museums becoming the places where people meet and produce knowledge. Boris Groys theorized museums as not only places of, not only privileged source of information that set up the paragon as to what good and bad art might look like, but as places to exemplify different strategies of choice, of subjective choice. As Benjamin demonstrated in his paper, that might be problematic because those choices might be results of manipulations and laying claims to the authority of things, but still this opens up possibilities at the same time. As Claire Bishop demonstrated, that museums become the place where the very notion of contemporaneity is questioned and receives a particular consideration as a very problematic place. Museums become the places of inclusion, that's to say, inclusion. Oh.
Maybe
Sorry? But can you see this?
Yeah, there we can see, but in the Zoom we don't.
Oh.
So that's the problem. It's like separate working with the Zoom and with the.
Sorry, some technical reasons.
It's downloading. Yeah, now see the yeah. Now it goes to this.
So okay, yeah.
I didn't want to miss your pictures.
So museums become the place of inclusion, understood socially and also art historically. And here in my presentation, in my present-day talk, I would like to dwell on the question of queer art in Garage Archive, which in my opinion fully corresponds to the notion, to what was said before. Queer art being a political question, first of all, nowadays in present-day Russia under the present-day circumstances, under neoconservative turn in Russian society, but also because queer art in Russian historiography was never, let's just say, visible. It doesn't mean that queer art is not visible at all. It it is in a way. It doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, because of course it does. But you know, queer art hardly constitutes a consistent movement with striking protagonists, with clear manifestos, with iconic works, maybe with a few exceptions. I will dwell on it a bit later. It is not visible within the dominant historical narratives, and sometimes projects that you may queer, they may be just, you know, just appear occasionally within a bigger body of work of different artists. So, and never supported by what comes after and what went before. So those may be just rare examples within a bigger body of work of a particular art practitioner. And starting point for my publication, as a starting point for it, I take the recent publication that appeared in Garage Journal, Studies in Art, Museums and Culture, which came out digitally in November 30. It is a collective publication authored by me and my colleagues from Garage Archive. I compiled it and wrote the introduction, but I'm not the only contributor. And it focuses on, well, primarily on the documents from Garage Archive that reflect the history of queer movement, of queerness in Russian art, and also refer to the projects that I would like to talk about that you may say as queer. Saying queer, just a few notions about the methodology. By saying queer, I refer to a bunch of theories that see gender identity and sexuality as being socially constructed, as a result of a performance of gender, as a result of particular social practices and the relationship of power, which queer in the fields of art, as was theorized by Renata Lawrence, help us not only to realize those categories, not only realize those relationships of power, but maybe take a certain distance to them, maybe attempt to deconstruct them, remaining, as Judith Butler told, critical to our own foundation, receiving queer critically, and understanding queer, as Anna-Marie Jagos mentioned it, as a theory that at the same time includes of its own mobility. So that's pretty much the basic definition of queer, but I think it's important to see the history of Russian art through those lenses, because it was hardly very often case in point. Saying queer, by saying queer in the archive, I do not mean, well, you can see the structure of Garage Archive, which consists of multiple collections, archival collections of compiled by different artists, curators, and art practitioners, institutions. And queer art hardly constitutes a particular section within this. And saying queer in art archive, I do not mean recompiling, reconfiguring things, taking different artifacts out and putting them into a special section of queer art. I mean, giving, well, many of those archives are formed historically and are written into the history. So let's be it, let's just leave it like that. But let's give to certain documents, to certain artistic practices and works, special consideration. Let's just apply certain lens and methodology to it. When we discussed this publication with my colleagues before putting it online, we talked about that. Well, first, there are practices which are openly queer, queerness of which is quite obvious, but you can't say that they were really named queer. So our task in our publication was just to I don't know, call white things white and black things black, just to call the queer art queer, just give it this kind of consideration. For certain projects, what we try to do, we try to see them as reflecting a certain kind of thinking, critical thinking. The projects that may be openly queer, but which can be thought in those terms. And I'll try to demonstrate this in the following presentation of mine. So first, can you see? So first artifact that we included in the publication, it was not my idea to work with it, but the idea of Sasha Obukhova, who is the curator of Garage Archive. In Russian, it's an artistic book compiled by Igor Makarevich and Elena Yelagina, one of the pioneers of conceptual art in Moscow, unofficial artistic scene since they work since 80s together. And it's an artistic book of photos and texts. In Russian, it's called Книга продолжений, so in English it might be the Book of Prolongations, which was a birthday present for Andrei Monastirsky, also one of the pioneers of conceptual art in Russia. And you can see here two men clinging, Andrei Monastirsky being applied makeup. And for those in the know, if you have some idea about what Andrei Monastirsky's body of work is about, it may come as a surprise because Andrei Monastirsky is anything but queer. There is nothing actually queer about his practice. He's just a conceptual artist, working with the language, with some formal things and semantics. But this kind of imagery, we have several other examples in our Garage Archive, some photo images like that, like men giving themselves hugs or kissing. None of the participants of mise-en-scène would say they perform any kind of gayness or queerness. So they just having fun, they just, I don't know, just fooling out, as they would say. But what is important, what's interesting is that these very, I don't know, playful scenes are absolutely deprived of any gayness and queerness. They just designate this kind of void, this kind of absence. So there was very little of sexuality in unofficial Soviet art, very little of work with the body and queer issues. So it's a void, it's an absence, which negatively signifies the presence. So it's like a reverse thing, this kind of, but that's why we decided to include this. Next archive that I would like to dwell on, I mentioned that there are several exceptions from this absence of queerness from Soviet art. So Vladislav Mamyshev-Monroe can be one of those exceptions of the rules. And we keep his whole archive of the documents of his performances, because he was famous for his performances, playing the roles, impersonating characters, and performing different identities. Here I included some of the images of him impersonating things from popular culture. Marilyn Monroe, who was eponymous for Monroe, Lyubov Orlova, who was a movie star of Stalin's era, and also Barbie doll was one of his projects of 2005. Also images from, that's to say, cultural consciousness of Russia, this folklore, Russian classical literature represented by Dostoevsky in this case, Russian history, Empress Katrina the Great, and Grigory Rasputin, Alla Pugacheva, pop singer, but also politicians. He was famous for performing politicians. Michael Gorbachev, who was not impersonated by Monroe in body, but who was travestied in the image, on the image. Also Bin Laden and Vladimir Putin, one of his images. Some other things. this series, I think, is exemplifying in case of Monroe, because Vladislav Monroe was actually doing. He was, well, if gender is a performance, if the identity is performed, Vladislav Mamyshev Monroe, he performed those identities. He constructed them and showing the very way of constructing this identity, how it is constructed, how it is made, I don't know, quick and dirty. Out of almost nothing, you can see the image of Russian patriarch, you know, with those spoons and mop and all those, I don't know, sutures and things. And so constructing them, bringing them into circulation, empowering them. At the same time, what he did, he disempowered them. He constructed and deconstructed them at the same time. And he, since he performed all those different identities, all those different images, he was like, I don't know, he was like designating all this broad range of what constitutes, I don't know, mass media, popular consciousness, the history, the very meaning of, I don't know, being Russian or being part of this world, being a man of all those identities, but at the same time of a man of no identity at all, because he never declared his own identity. He was never clear about that. He was also a prolific writer, and in some of his writings, it seemed that he made, I don't know, that he came out as a subject of a particular identity, but we can never trust artist's word. It was, we almost doubt whether he was serious about it or whether he was joking. As Vladislav Monroe once put it in one of his interviews, that he considered himself a sanitizer of this world, that he can contain all those identities and dissolve them. And that's the position of, I don't know, constructing things and refusing to be interpolated as a subject of those categories that lay claim to the power. The next example of queer art is, well, here I'm including here a particular project by Oleg Maslov and Viktor Kuznetsov. It's a set of postcards with staged mise-en-scènes that refer to Satyricon by Petronius. And actually, this item was proposed by a colleague of mine, Anastasia Koteleva, who oversees this section of Garage Archive, and I'm including here a quotation from her contribution to our publication. But Victor and Oleg, they were part of a bigger movement that was very active in St. Petersburg. Officially, it still exists, but not active anymore, since that formed in late 80s, which was called New Academicism. New Academicism being a group of artists and a bunch of artistic practices that actively used the classical imagery of art, that struggled in, as they stated, to go back to the classical ideas of the eternal art, to all those representative things in painting and photography and graphical art, which was quite shocked at that time, because the official language of artistic expression was socialist realism, with the same claim, with the same claims on those classicism and the best thing from all art of the world, and all the unofficial art was developing in the opposition to it, and proclaiming the return to this past, to this classics, was quite controversial and considered like right-wing turn and, you know, those controversial things. But it was very, I don't know, you may say ironical. Maria Engström of Sweden, Slavic researcher, he put it as a post-irony, because, for example, what was it this sense of classical art, for example, in Timur Novicus. It was a kind of pastiche, you know, it was combined images of technically reproduced photographs with the same tapestries, which actually here in those particular works, they referred to the very sense of homosexuality in a very cultivated way. You know, the Saint Sebastian and Oscar Wilde, for example. But new academicists in the beginning of 90s, I dwell here particularly on the early works from 90s, they came out with this striking bodiliness of the works. They were very very corporeal, very sensual, as opposed to the conceptual movements or to, for example, a wave of radical performance that was also on the rise in 90s, but was more, you know, like hectic and not that much cultivated. So they were in opposition to everyone. And in the very foundation of this opposition was this sense of human body, which can also be seen as the homosexual one. Some other examples of another painter, Bela Matveyeva, and her works. Another section, another example in my presentation, it concerns Cyber Feminist Club, which was active in St. Petersburg from 1904 to 2006, and we keep as in case of Mamyshev Monroe, we keep the entire archive of it. Cyber Feminist Club was not only important because of its making bridges between Russian and international feminist movements. They were part of Cyber Feminist International, for example. And not only because of bringing in those feminist perspectives in the educational programs and exhibitional programs they hosted, not only because of their experiments with the lifestyles, not only because of the experiments with their own appearance and the image of those. For example, those two here on the photo, we can see Alla Mitrofanova and Irina Aktoganova, who were the co-founders of Cyber Feminist Club. And for example, in the philosophical writings by the members of Cyber Feminist Club, they theorized, I don't know, like pregnancy as a philosophical problem and things like that. But another thing that I would like to highlight here is those projects which are called courses of practical independence for women. Those were literally the courses. They did not necessarily have to do with art. Actually, there was nothing about art at all in those practical studies. But Cyber Feminist Club, they were one of the pioneers of using computers and, for example, using the internet, and they helped different NGOs in Russia to construct their web pages, which was not that obvious back then. They taught women, I don't know, how to use all those appliances for innovation works, I don't know, drilling holes and like this, using computers and so on, raising up the question of technology as a tool for the transformation and the question of technique as a means of social changes. That was what they were about. The project that is not openly queer and which at a certain point may not seem queer at all, it is called Monstration. What is menstruation? Menstruation is a mass demonstration, mass action that was organized by back then based in Novosibirsk, Artyom Loskotov, an artist who started gathering people with on the street. It was really a mass action. It attracted a lot of visitors. People holding up those slogans, very absurd ones. So here, for example, it says, my poster from the last year, and here it says that there is nothing destructive about my slogan, and I will not even try to translate all those play of words and puns because it's really funny, but it's absolutely absurd. It's like pointless. It's about the nonsense, but it's a mass action. People holding them above their heads and gathering together, coming together en masse in big amounts. So it's like a protestful demonstration, but which cannot be thought of like that. It cannot be interpolated as a protestful demonstration. So it presents itself as a mass action, but it's not mass action. It's something else without any particular identity. And the last thing, it was also the idea of Sasha Olokova to include this project to the presentation into the publication. The project by Natalia Pershina Yakimanskaya, also known as Glukla, who was back then part of a duo Fabric of the Found Clothes, which does, and Natalia is not part of it anymore. If I'm not mistaken, it's just stopped existing as a duo, as a Fabric of Found Clothes. But this project, it's a copybook with the photographs of people. It says above the photos like a stranger number 1, stranger number X and Y, and like that, of people who might seemingly look strange, maybe, I don't know, maybe strangely dressed, or I don't know, feels like they do not fit the time, like they fall out of the flow of life. And that, in my view, it tackles, since queer, we were speaking about the inclusiveness, and the reverse side being the exclusion, and queer art is also about the extension of those fields of representation, and pointing out what was excluded from our consideration. So that project exactly tackles those subjects metaphorically, but still it brings in this perspective. So that's why it's here. So that's all about my presentation. Thank you so much.